Hi there, Joey McGuire again. Just about to read the second chapter of The Making of McGuire. Just realised I meant to tell you my criminal injuries compensation number, uh, which is claim number L491 000 Mike Echo Alpha Romeo. It's important that you know that. Anyway, let's just find chapter 2. Hope there's someone still listening. Chapter 2, The Ultimate Challenge. Joey's thoughts were wandering. What crazy notion had inspired him to enlist in the parachute regiment he simply did not know. At the recruiting office, after achieving high marks in the tests, they had tried in vain to convince him to enlist with the intelligence corps. But for some unknown reason, Joey was having none of it. It wasn't as if he'd ever craved for war. In fact, he'd never thought of joining the parachute regiment until a few days earlier. He had vague recollections of watching the Red Devils jumping on the town moor from his bedroom window as a child, but even so, he didn't consider this the reason for his decision. He preferred to think it was the growing unemployment in the area and his inner craving for independence and personal achievement. The journey to Aldershot was a long one, and Joey was totally unaware of the shock to come. "That's fuck all," he heard someone exclaim. "I got 33 offences for car theft. In fact, the last one I nicked, I watched the driver giving his bird one in the woods before I nicked it. And you won't believe this, they both left their clothes in the car. I bet they went apeshit when they realized what I'd fucking done." As Joey entered the room, everyone had laughed. He was smiling, for he knew the storyteller was right. No one would believe this tale. Everyone turned to greet him and invited him to sit down. He'd been last to arrive, and consequently everyone seemed to be well acquainted, except himself. But it didn't take long to mix in. Everyone was plying for airspace, occasionally shouting over each other, proudly bragging of their past offences, as though they were some major achievement in their lives. Countless tales of fights and stabbings were the agenda of the day, leaving Joey speechless and unsure of the decisions he had made. He looked around him. Broken noses, fiery eyes, muscular frames, a right motley crew, and he remembered well his first impressionable thoughts. How on earth am I going to survive this? Joey had never been in trouble, and could not for the life of him remember winning a fight at school. The day eventually came to an end. Beds had been allocated and made. Bags had been unpacked, and the new day would see the start of 6 months of intensive infantry training. "Hands off, cocks! Put on socks!" came a shrieking cry. A familiar statement in the months to come, the army's way of saying good morning, most endearing, he remembered thinking. Thus started the endless days of bullying the blitz, battle marches, weapon training, and much, much more. There was never a dull moment, never a moment to himself, a constant battle to survive the tortures of the day, in the attempt to achieve the ultimate honor, his parachute wings. Most days ended in complete exhaustion for everyone, but there was in return a feeling of belonging and a sense of real comradeship. Over the first 2 months the task of separating the men from the boys began in earnest, and it wasn't long before Joey saw the loudest and so-called bravest from the first day being sent down the road, tails between their legs, never to return. It turned out that only a quarter of those who joined with 389 Platoon actually passed off the square in the end. There were so many challenges, so many fears to overcome. After all, Joey was still just a boy, at best a young man. An escape and evasion exercise left memories never to be forgotten, and, with his head still between his legs, Joey began to recollect the events of that day. This was the moment Joey first set eyes upon Nobby Arnold, the James Bond regimental sergeant major of the depot. He briefed the platoon in such precise detail that they all fell for the cleverly planned scam, hook, line, and sinker. It seemed one para, based in Cyprus, were undermanned, and 389 platoon, being the best at depot, had been picked to help out for a few weeks. Passports issued, inoculations given, flight schedules relayed. They did everything they could to make the whole thing believable. It worked. The next day, having had no sleep, they were driven to Brize Norton. But for one thing. Brize Norton must have been the name of the compound where they were to finally end up. The tail flaps on the trucks were down when suddenly they came to a halt. Both vehicles began to reverse over grass, and Joey quickly became aware that something was very wrong. The tail flap was lifted, and Joey jumped to the ground in an attempt to escape, but was greeted by two burly enemy corporals wielding pick handles. He made his decision to comply with instructions without question. In the next few moments all hell let loose. They were prisoners in a large wired compound. Everyone was stripped to various stages, hooded with pillowcases over which were strewn Hessian sacks. Forcibly, they were all run around the compound, bumping into fences and buildings to disorientate them, and finally they were herded into a line and made to lie face down on the cold, wet grass. Everyone was given a number, which was written on the back of their hands. Interrogation followed quickly. Joey knew he was not the only one around wetting his pants. He remembered how he had grinned when he realized he at least still had his on. It had been just too realistic. Shouts from loud-hailers, pyrotechnics exploding too near for comfort, dogs sniffing and licking their naked private parts, boots and punches producing shrieks of pain along the line. The terrified platoon were then herded into a dark building and made to lean against the wall on their fingertips, systematically beaten, still hooded. Shaking with cold, and more so fear, having just been on the end of a beating, Joey was dragged by two men, constantly abusing him as they went. With both bootlaces tied, he was made to kneel down while balancing on a small wedge of wood. The normal interrogation began. At one stage, a pick handle had been used to strike his ankles in an attempt to break his resilience. After all else had failed, and Joey had given no information other than his name, rank, and number, the water treatment was applied. 6 men held him face up on the ground, whilst another slowly dripped a jerrycan full of water over the sacks covering his face. This created a water film, which prevented Joey breathing correctly. Okay. Breakfast call. Thank you. Sorry about that. It's one of the carers telling me breakfast is at 8 o'clock. This created a water film, which prevented Joey breathing correctly and eventually brought a terrified, writhing, screaming young man to unconsciousness. On coming round, Joey realized he'd been sick inside his hood, and the men were laughing and rubbing it into his face. He still would not talk, but they just did it again. After this, when he had come round, he was more than willing to talk. After all, it was only peacetime operations. He was led away in disgrace, so he thought, with the other squealers to a debrief tent. When he got there, he realized he held out longer than most, but that gave him little comfort. There was, however, still more to come. On leaving the tent without his hood, Joey noticed one of the platoon was still holding out. They got him tied to the branch of a tree by the feet and naked, and they were bouncing him up and down. He was screaming, and they were pissing all over him, while the Alsatian dogs were jumping up and down at him in a frenzy. Joey had known then that he had a long way before becoming a man and a parachute soldier, and he also knew that what they had just done to him and what he had witnessed would stay with him forever. A coldness had come over him. He knew he would die before he ever allowed himself to be taken prisoner for real. It took a long time to get over that day. He had known all his captors, and he knew he would never trust them again. And he didn't. The days ahead were filled with battle camps, Brecon, marches, runs, more runs, drill and more drill. The platoon ranks had been whittled away, and were by then little more than a section. Just before P Company week, the ranks were swelled to platoon level by an influx of junior paras. That week was the hardest of all, and the survivors were tested to the limits of their courage and endurance. Joey had come through the challenge. There was just one thing left to do, that being to do his jumps at Abingdon. Joey lifted his head from between his legs, the clock on the wall telling him he'd been engrossed in his thoughts for a while. Quite some time. For a brief moment, Joey let his forgotten pride flow through his veins, and he knew, as he looked around at all the nameless faces in the room, that none of them could ever know the way he felt on the day his wings were pinned on his shoulder. He had been a paratrooper, every man an emperor.